contributes profoundly in and around her community, making them a destination to live, work, and shop. And whereas her various volunteering efforts include chairing our annual wine and beer walk and serving as an executive board member in the role at the San Dimas Chamber of Commerce. And whereas Marilyn embodies the role of a leader and her service to the community in and beyond exemplary. And whereas she has overseen adversity with grace and shown strength during times of uncertainty, now therefore I, Emmett G. Badar, Mayor Pro Tem Eric Weber, Councilmember Dennis Bertone, John Ebner, and Ryan A. Vienna, hereby proclaim Marilyn Sparks as a Woman of the Year in the city of San Dimas. In witness thereof, I, Mayor Emmett G. Badar, have hereon set my hand and caused the seal of the city of San Dimas to be affixed this 12th day of April 2022. Congratulations, Marilyn.
Thank you so much. Your generosity is overwhelming, and I can't believe that I was so lucky to pick San Dimas as a place to open my business, and the support and the friendships that have been forged through the chamber and through the city have been literally life-changing. So thank you all.
Thank you. Sylvia, would you like to take a moment to tell the television world and the audience about what's going to happen with Marilyn tomorrow from
Absolutely. So we're
Holden?
going, yes, absolutely. So tomorrow, it's at the Walker House patio. We're going to be having a celebration. Assemblymember Chris Holden will be in attendance along with a lot of the city officials. It is open to the community. It starts from 5 and it goes on to about 6:30. So everybody's welcome. Thank you so much for helping us honor an amazing woman, Marilyn Sparks, our board chair and assembly. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we can take a picture.
Anyone who wishes to step up and take photos, feel free. We can stay here as long as you guys want to take them.
Hi, Margie. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
You know, our chamber, for being such a small chamber, does fantastic work in the city. And Sylvia, thank you very much. And congratulations, Marilyn.
Henry, no?
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, city staff, and public. It is with my pleasure to introduce our new housing manager to our San Dimas team, Lily Flores. She comes from us from the city of, most recently, the city of El Monte. She has over 15 years of housing-related experience. Prior to that, she is with the city of Pomona, and we're very excited to have her join our team. And she's already hit the ground running the last 2 weeks and has dove headfirst into a number of housing-related issues. But I'd like to introduce Lily Flores.
Thank you. Just want to say thank you. I'm really excited to be here and ready to serve this community, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Oral communications. Members of the audience are invited to address the City Council on any item on this agenda or not on this agenda. Please comment. Public comment will not be taken during each individual item except for public hearing items. Comments on public hearing items will be heard when that item is scheduled for discussion. Under the provisions of the Brown Act, the legislative body is prohibited from engaging in discussions on any item not appearing on the posted agenda. However, your concerns may be referred to a staff or set for discussion at a later date. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. Madam City Clerk?
First speaker tonight is Amanda Lee, speaking on bus stops.
I heard you this time. Okay. Thank you. So there's a few urgent issues that need to be hopefully discussed tonight. The first one is the bus stop. So I had watched the meeting in regards to some of the ideas that had been proposed by our city staff. And I know the topic of people experiencing homelessness using the benches to sleep had been brought up. And it was brought up in a way that I think people were leaning towards just not having any benches or any shade because then it will discourage them from hanging out at the bus stop. But I would like to propose, Mr. Badar, I would like you to take one of those buses. I want you to walk there, 1 mile. I want you to stand and wait at least 30 minutes for that bus without a bench, no sitting, nothing to lean on, and wait for that bus. And hope it comes on time. Because as somebody that's taken the bus when I was in college, I didn't drive, so I took the bus. I walked 1.5 miles to the bus stop, then I waited. Several of those bus stops did not have benches. I was exhausted, and I was young, mind you. I was in my early 20s, late teen, and the benches really do serve a purpose for our residents. I would also like to remind you that right now, with so many changes happening in our city, with the gold line coming in, whether we like it or not, I know there's a lot of consternation around that as well. City. We really don't want a lot more cars. I mean, you can hear a lot of residents already saying we have too much traffic going on Bonita that's going too fast. They're not stopping for pedestrians. If we don't have a welcoming city for using public transit, for using the train and that kind of stuff, we're going to have a problem that we're going to have to widen our roads, which means a lot more road space. It's not going to seem that small of a town anyway. So I just ask you for the bus stops, please consider the benches, consider measures aside for any issues that come up with people experiencing homelessness. We need that anyways. That is a big issue in our city, whether we have the benches or not. So I think they should be counted aside. Consider shade. This city is way too hot during the summer not to have shade for people waiting for those buses. So many people, elderly people that don't drive, college students that don't drive, people working to commute that can't afford gas right now that use it. We need to make it easy for them to use. Make our city welcoming to everybody that needs it. And that's my time, so that's it. Have a happy Easter, everybody. Thank you.
I know this, Amanda, I know we're not supposed to have an exchange back and forth, but the reality is I've spent 15 years on the Foothill Transportation Board. Okay, I have been to the bus stops. I have ridden the buses. I understand exactly what you're saying. Okay.
It's not riding the bus, it's actually walking to the bus and waiting for them and hoping they show up on time.
I totally understand. Totally understand.
So it's just the benefits to consider, that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Maddie Genovese from Charter Oak Mobile Home Estates.
Good evening. I wanted to thank you for all you've done so far, particularly for the U-turn sign and for Lily Flores, so we have a contact, and generally for listening. And I want you to know that even though you've done all these things, we're still going to be here. We're still monitoring what's going on. There are still very many problems. We know Ms. Flores is new and she needs some time to catch up and get a handle on it, and we respect that and we will honor it. I want to read you a little story. An old woman walked up and tied her old mule to the hitching post. As she stood there, brushing some of the dust from her face and clothes, a young gunslinger stepped out of the saloon with a gun in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other. The young gunslinger looked at the old woman and laughed. "Hey, old woman, have you ever danced?" The old woman looked up at the gunslinger and said, "No, I never did dance, never really wanted to." A crowd had gathered as the gunslinger grinned and said, "Well, you old bag, you're going to dance now," and started shooting at the old woman's feet. The old woman prospector, not wanting to get her toe blown off, started hopping around. Everybody was laughing. When his last bullet had been fired, the young gunslinger, still laughing, holstered his gun and turned around to go back into the saloon. The old woman turned to her pack mule, pulled out a double-barreled shotgun, and cocked both hammers. The loud clicks carried clearly through the desert air, and the crowd stopped laughing immediately. The young gunslinger heard the shots too, and he turned around very slowly. The silence was almost deafening. The crowd watched as the young gunman stared at the old woman and the large gaping holes of those twin barrels. The barrels of the shotgun never wavered in the old woman's hands as she quietly said, "Son, have you ever kissed a mule's ass?" The gunslinger swallowed hard and said, "No, ma'am, but I've always wanted to." This little story has 5 lessons for everybody. Number 1, never be arrogant. Number 2, don't waste ammunition. Number 3, whiskey makes you think you're smarter than you are. Number 4, always make sure you know who has the power. And number 5, don't mess with old women. They didn't get old by being stupid. Thank you. Oh, the Gospel Fest, thank you for the permit. And I have some cards so you don't forget, and you can put it on your calendar. Thank you.
Next speaker is Nora Chan with library updates.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members, and City Manager and staff. I'm Nora Chen, the manager of the St. Dimas Library. Today I'm going to give you some updates about the library closure. Unfortunately, due to unexpected engineering issues, the closure of the St. Dimas Library may be extended to early summer. At this moment, we don't have a date to reopen yet. However, that I talked to the contractor on site just the last week, and they told me that the project has very close to completion. So hopefully in May, we can see the completion, and so we can kind of started our move-in and reopening. So at this moment, we are looking forward to early June. So hopefully it will be first week, or if not, then it will be the second week of June. I know we receive a lot of concerns and needs for the library, and I totally understand. And so, but we push the department, the ISD, the Internal Service Department, and they say they are going to try to expedite the process. However, that's something we cannot really, it's not in our control at this moment. So hopefully, I know it's very disappointing to most of you and to me too. So, but this is the current update. And even the library is still closed, and I still, there's some services still going on. And I believe some of you have seen the news that the California State Parks is going to kind of, if library card holders can have a free kind of vehicle entrance, that will be coming soon. At this moment, we are working on it. My understanding is every library will receive free passes. and customer can check out for, it's like a book. You checked out for 3 weeks, and after 3 weeks, you return, and so the next person can use it. So at this moment, it's not available yet, but we are looking for early May. So right now, St. Dimas is closed. You can still check out from Laverne Library or Charter Oak Library. Okay, and last but not least, right now it's spring, and we do have a spring reading sprint program. If people read 400 minutes, then you will get a prize. You can get a prize at Laverne Library or Charter Oak Library. If you all the program is online, you register online. But if you feel it's kind of too far, you don't want to redeem your prize, you can save your certificate. After we reopen in June, then you are welcome to bring in your certificate, and we will be happy to give you your prize. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Nora.
Thank you.
I always look forward to your updates.
Next speaker is Ruth Leuven, speaking on the bus stop.
Excuse me, I have to move this up just a wee bit. Ruth Leuven, good evening, councilman and the chamber. Upon listening to what Ms. Lee had to say about the bus stops, I was moved. I have an 18-year-old college student. Now, that may not seem unusual, except he started at the age of 14. When he was 14 years old, he was accepted into Cal State LA at the honors program, double major in international trade and statistical finance. He had to take the bus to school. Sometimes we were able to drop him off at the Metrolink and he could go directly, but oftentimes he had to walk from home to the bus stop and wait. Sometimes the Foothill Transit was on time, and sometimes it was not. And he took that to the Gold Line, to Metro Center, to school, and then he took it home. He was at school for 8 to 10 hours a day. My son has been a straight A student the entire time he's been at school. He started teaching stats at the university at age 16, yet he still takes the bus every day to school. He wants to reduce his carbon footprint, if you can believe that, and increase mine. But with all that being said, he relies on those buses and the bus stop, and yet he stays there. So I would worry about my son if he had no place to park his little bottom while he was waiting for that. And I would worry about the other kids that are like him. They call them Eepsters, the ones that start at the age of 12, 13, 14. It's not as unusual as you may think. And they all take public transportation to school. And they all do it independently. They're like little Doogie Housers, just a wee bit older. And so I implore you as the parent of a child like that, I implore you as a citizen to consider what this effect it might have to those who may rely on public transportation the most, our youth, and those that often may seem unseen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, those are all the speaker cards that have been turned in.
Okay, is there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak?
And I'm short, so it has to go down. Mayor, City Council, City staff, and San Dimas residents. My name is Cynthia Williams, and I'm the owner of Old Town Antiques in downtown San Dimas. I'm representing the Bonita Corridor Group and the Downtown Merchants tonight. 2 weeks ago, the Downtown Merchants held our 17th annual Garden Affair, celebrating the beginning of the spring season. The participating merchants bring in new items, cookies, goodies for shoppers, and have sales throughout the stores. The event brings people into our city. They shop in our stores, they eat in our restaurants, they spend money for us. We would like to thank Councilpersons Vienna and Weber for their support for promoting this event on social media. We would like to thank Mayor Bedar for his support in attending the event and visiting our stores. In San Dimas, we are blessed to have an amazing Chamber of Commerce. Sylvia Melendez, the Chief Executive Officer of the Chamber, gave us the full support of the Chamber resources. She designed flyers and posters for our event. She coordinated with the merchants, advertised our event on social media, and gave up her day off on Saturday to help and make the event a success. The support of the Chamber is amazing, and we are lucky to have Sylvia and the other members. Small businesses are the backbone of a city, and in order to survive, we need the support of our city and our local chamber. I have been a merchant in downtown for almost 30 years. The change in the support from the city council, city staff, and chamber in the last few years has made a noticeable difference. This year was a complete success and one of the best we have ever had, especially coming off the last couple years. We have several events planned through the rest of the year and appreciate your continued support. One other note, as far as I know, not one business was lost in downtown during the pandemic. We've even added 3 more businesses. So the fact that the city and the staff, our chamber, Sylvia, Marilyn is behind us, I can tell you that it's made a dramatic difference in our sales, in what we're doing in the city, and our attitude. What a different attitude we have in downtown now. So I really just wanted to come and tell you thank you, tell the chamber thank you, everyone that supported us. We notice it, we appreciate it, and we look for your continued support. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak towards the council? Seeing none, we'll move to the consent calendar. All items on the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be enacted with one motion unless a member of the city council requests separate discussion.
Mayor, I'd like to pull item 3 and item 7. And other than that, I would move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, item 3 being to approve the San Dimas Community Forest Management Plan. And item 7 is proclaim April Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. Okay, any discussion?
I'm sorry, on item 3, I actually would just move that we take that to a study session at a future date, hopefully sooner than later. Just one other piece on that is I would also hope, it's a little alarming to me or surprising that apparently this community forest management plan has existed for quite some time, and this is probably a separate topic, but along the same lines that I would hope any plan like this should be distributed to council maybe annually, or at a minimum when new council members come on. I've been on council 5 years. This is the first time I've seen this plan. And there's some very specific things in it, which is why I think we need a study session to discuss not just the amendments, but there's a lot of different components to this. So I would hope that any plan that is like this that the council has passed at some point that is still in existence and in use today, that you could aggregate those and distribute them to council so that we all have them. So I don't know if those are 2 separate pieces for you. But you can let me know and we'll handle accordingly.
I can work to staff to make sure any of these operative documents are either placed somewhere or conveyed to the council. I don't know about annually, but I think at least I know where to go to reference it, to know what's out there.
Yeah, at a minimum, if council changes, I think every council member that comes on, I mean, Eric, have you ever seen this before?
No.
I know I didn't see it.
It was quite a read, though.
I mean, I know Dennis and John and Emmett were probably there when it was born, but, I haven't seen it. So anyways, so if I can get a second for the study session, that would be cool.
I want to make a comment about that. I'm supportive of that. Are we taking a vote on that, or?
No, we're not going to take a vote. We just need to.
Just going to do it. Okay. I would echo, though, some of what Ryan said in that I, too, thought that this should have been not on the consent calendar, because I was thinking, has the council ever had this before us for comments or, input or anything like that? the Parks and Recreation Department, along with the Parks and Recreation Commission and a subcommittee that I think we all knew about, the Urban Forest Subcommittee, did do a lot of work on it, and there are minor changes to the existing plan that, as you say, has been around for a while and has been updated periodically, but actually not for the last 8 years. So with that kind of update, a study session is a good idea. And so I appreciate doing that, and we'll see what comes out of that.
Thank you.
Okay.
And
All right, item 7.
Item 7, so the only thing with this one, I appreciate staff getting this proclamation together for April as Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. Just as a new order of business in connection with this, I'd be looking for support, is to look at an appropriation to be able to provide training to our city staff. I was surprised to learn that we don't have any training for autism to our city staff, especially those who work in like the Parks and Recreation Department who are interacting with youth. I think it would be momentous and a positive thing to maybe make an appropriation and have staff bring back a report with training if you can identify or perhaps you've looked into that you could propose to council and see if we could provide that type of training to them. So I don't know if anyone else is interested in that.
I'd be interested, so we could bring it back.
Cool. And with that, I would move approval of the proclamation of April as Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
Thank
Mayor,
you.
I'm not sure I got the motion or second for the rest of the agenda, or rest of the consent calendar.
It was right in the beginning.
I made the motion, and I think
Dennis made the second.
I seconded it.
All right. Okay, we'll move on. Other business discussion and direction for a new bus shelter standard design. Staff?
Oh.
Evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Sherry Garlick, Director of Public Works. Before you tonight is a request for your direction on replacement of the wooden bus shelter standard. Oh, I turned it on? That always helps. Okay. For members of the audience who may not be aware, Foothill Transit operates the bus transit service in the city and has 5 routes shown here. The ridership pre-COVID was about 220,000 Border-Lights a year. The busiest bus stop was on Arrow Highway at Maimone, and it had over 18,500 Border-Lights. There are 34 active bus stops throughout the city. 18 have bus shelters, 12 just have benches, and 4 have no bench or no shelter. Foothill Transit determines the bus routes and the bus stop locations with some minor input from the city. Foothill Transit only places the pole and sign indicating what route the stop services. The city installs and maintains the other amenities such as trash can, concrete pad, and bus shelter or bench. The city receives monies to monitor to maintain these amenities from Proposition A transit funds. However, the city also uses these same transit funds to pay for other transit services such as dial-a-ride and get-about services. We typically allocate about $19,000 a year for bus stop maintenance. This is a picture of the current wooden bus shelter standard. This is right in front of City Hall. Again, we have 18 of these in the city. Most are over 20 years old or older and have reached the end of their life cycle. These shelters are fabricated site-specific, so repair pieces and replacement has to be individually fabricated. Repairs have proven costly, and they are difficult to sanitize. And to remove graffiti, they have to be sanded and then resealed. Additionally, because of their age, the shelters require more frequent maintenance, which will continue to increase as they get older. Due to the labor involved, the cost to repair and replace one of these structures, or to remove and replace one of these structures, is about $22,000. With these costs in mind, in September 2021, staff recommended moving to a metal prefabricated shelter and presented several different types for council consideration. One of the discussion points is that the bus shelters can become an attractive nuisance for users other than their intended purpose. We have, in fact, had bus shelters in the city used by people for camping in the past. And that's actually a problem for many reasons, but it also deters ridership on the bus lines. Staff has researched industry best practices for this design of bus shelters and benches, and reached out to the sheriff and the homeless outreach services team to incorporate their design recommendations in the future bus stop shelters. And we'll talk about some of those recommendations in a minute. I did want to show you an example of a bus bench with no shelter. This bench has no anti-camping amenities on it, so it's an example of really what not to do. In the September meeting, staff brought several shelter designs for consideration, and council indicated interest in 3 particular shelter designs. They like the metal standing seam roof with both a hip and gable style. So this is the metal standing seam roof. This is actually a hip style. This is a gable style. And then they also mentioned that they were interested in a axle style bus shelter.
Sherry, just a quick question. On the one on the lower, what are those seats made of?
So those are metal seats. Those are anti-camping seats. And they're just individual seats, so you can't really lay across them.
Okay, can those seats be somehow covered with something, or a specific type of paint or something where, you wouldn't, somebody sitting on it in the dead of summer would not become burned with metal seats? We could come up with something. If that's what council determines, we can definitely come up with something we can work with. It just seems like it'd be kind of a safety problem if we have that same problem, and remember in some of our parks where our playground equipment is too hot for our kids to play on. So that could be a concern of mine. So thank you.
Okay.
Sherry, while you're on that slide, what is the difference between the hip and the gable roof? Is it just the way the roof is shaped? Or maybe you can explain it.
So the gable has this is almost a 90 degree right here. So really there's only 2 sloping sides on a gable roof. Right. On a hip roof, you have 4 sloping sides. So instead of actually, let me just forward a little bit. And so this is a hip. So this is sloped right here.
Right.
And this is a gable. So this is a vertical face right here.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Looking at the I guess the axle one, that bottom one.
Yes.
I noticed in the piece that goes next, that particular unit has solar and a light feature as well.
Yes. So the pricing that the staff put before you, it does include solar lighting as an option, and since you bring it up, we did talk with the sheriff's homeless outreach services team, and one of the items that they recommended against was actually incorporating solar. So that's, they've seen problems with solar, the panel or the light being disconnected and being used to charge.
Sherry,
phones.
the one on the bottom doesn't seem to be much protection against rain.
You've got some close. Yeah, closer.
Yes, do you want to?
Explain everything a little bit more.
So, it does, it is a shelter. It probably does not provide as much, as you are correct, it does not provide as much shelter from the rain, but for us, it's, we have a lot of more sun, I think. But you are correct, it does not, is not as, this is a more modern design, which may not be as compatible with, say, the downtown, early California type architecture. But,
Is that a perforated roof on the actual one?
so this is actually it's a plastic roof.
Okay.
So staff would recommend a metal roof. So instead of a plastic, and that's one of the things, what I wanted to do is show these as kind of samples of styles. For instance, one of the things you'll see in some of the later pictures of different colors, staff would recommend going with a San Dimas brown or similar type color, because that's what most of our fixtures are in the city. It makes them fade away a little bit, so they're not as prominent. Allows the architecture behind it to be more noticeable.
Sherry, when I look at the photo of the axle one, okay, it appears to me, is it a mesh, a metal mesh? Because I can see
This one is a polycarbonate.
but is it a mesh? Because I can see through the top into the
Right.
building, the next, behind it, right in there, the shadows.
Right. This particular one is a polycarbonate one, but you can probably get them with mesh as well. There's many different roofing styles that you can get if you prefer, rather than a solid metal roof, if you would like a mesh. The only problem with a mesh is it further reduces the ability for it to, provide rain shelter.
Yeah, that's what I was concerned. I would probably be preferring something that's going to help protect from the rain.
Okay.
And did the sheriffs indicate why, other than just that, the disconnection of the solar panels for other purposes? Other than that, was there another reason why they were discouraging it?
That is the reason that they gave me, and we'll be entering in further talks with them, with their team, to go into some other ways to mitigate, to make this less appealing for camping. So we've talked about several different, a couple different approaches. For instance, we have a periodic maintenance schedule on the shelters, so that we post the shelters that from this date to this date, there will be maintenance done on it, and that way we can go in and actually clean it and do adjustments, and anybody that's there longer than between buses we could require them to move. So it would, and we could sanitize the bus shelter. If it's a metal bus shelter, it's much easier to sanitize. So.
The installation, looking just at those three that you put up, the installation footprint for the axle is obviously smaller than the others. So, I mean, in theory, you could put two of those in a location where you may only be able to put one of those.
The limiting factor is the depth right now. Yes, and so you could put two. Two of them, typically they're 8 foot by 4-foot or 5-foot wide. Most of these shelters are 4-foot wide, so they'd fit in our right-of-way. Typically, our right-of-way is 8 feet. So you'd have your 4-foot bottom, and actually what I wanted on this one is to show you that we're looking at the roof is the style of the roof that you want, and then we didn't have any pictures of exactly what we were proposing, but on both of these shelter types, if you went with one of those, we'd have it's called a half panel. So this is about 2.5 feet between this back leg and this front leg. It's about 2.5 feet, so that it creates a little bit more room for somebody to walk by in that 8-foot right-of-way.
There's also protection on the back, too, against wind and rain.
And if that's something that you desire, that actually makes this a better, more sound structure. But we were leaning away from that because of the ability of, or people graffitiing or etching into the polycarbonate.
Sherry, with that one, that number 2 to the right there, okay, the way the roof is, if in fact we went with something like that, it would be fairly easy for someone to put, sheets up or curtains to create a more closed-in area, if they're going to camp there overnight or something like that. But because of the 4 legs, is it possible to take and have the back legs and then an angle, up to the roof and attach it so that the roof is actually being held up by the one leg and then an angle here to support the outer side of it?
So if there's a particular design that you want, we can go and get it and do an actual engineering design on it. There would be a custom bus shelter. There is expense to that. These we selected, these are standard bus shelter types that are relatively inexpensive. The shelter itself is around $7,000. When you start getting into your more custom shelters, this is an example of a much more expensive shelter. A standard 8-foot shelter, which is half of this, is about $26,000 just for the metal prefabrication. So there's a lot we can do, and if there's some particular design element that you prefer, then we can actually get it designed the way you want it.
What's the cost per panel? Like, you bring up a good point about vandalism, so what would be the cost to replace those as vandalism would likely occur?
On the panel itself, we estimated these without panels. I would say probably they're around $600 or $700 just per panel.
Wow.
So you were mentioning earlier when we were talking about the wood shelters that are already in place, that they were somewhat custom built for each particular location
Yes.
on the site. Do you have any idea, just roundabout off the top of your head, whether the majority of those are 2-person bus shelters or 4-person or?
Almost all of them are two-person bus shelter.
Okay.
And really, in reality, most people, only one person sits there, and the other person does enjoy the shade, but typically it's one person sits down at a time.
Okay.
So these shelters are typically about 8 feet wide by 4 feet deep. So the city, staff is working with the homeless outreach services team to try to set up some strategies for dealing with potential abuse of the station, or of the shelters. And we'll be meeting later on in the month. I talked with Deputy Lewis. Had a lot of good ideas. So working further with that. One of the ideas that he talked about was on the benches themselves. Obviously, in the industry, they have the anti-sleeping devices on them, so you make it uncomfortable for somebody to lay out on the bench. But what they brought forward is you really don't want to have a gap underneath the bench, because that's where people store their gear if they're going to camp there. So, and you can see the gap here. So we're discussing ways to eliminate that on the bench itself. So.
Do you have a photo of, on the axle, of just the seats, coming from upward, looking down at them?
I don't have I can provide that. I don't have it on right now.
Okay, and what's the size of the seats?
They look like they're about 2 by 2.
All right. Thank you.
Is there any bus stops that are in the city that might, the ridership might justify adding seating capacity to? I know we were talking about the bus stop on Arrow Highway at 18,000 rides.
Yes, there are a couple that that people have requested additional bus benches, and we've had some shelter requests.
Yeah. I'm not a huge fan of the axle design just as it looks, but to be honest, it's growing on me, because one thing you said is that generally a two-person shelter, only one person is sitting on the bench because you're going to sit right on basically a stranger's lap. Whereas this one, you could really be back to back and be reading a book and not even be that close to the person that's sitting on the other bench. And it kind of adds to the ability, just the way it's constructed, to be able to expand at some point if a bus stop later requires additional seating capacity. You could throw another one right next to it and it would fit in just fine.
When the 18,000 ridership, how long a period, over what time frame?
Over a year, in a year, in the fiscal, or in the year 2019.
Thank you.
Pre-COVID.
Yeah, I'm kind of in agreement with Eric that I kind of lean for a number of reasons, and to address some of the public comments earlier, I'm very empathetic to ridership in public transit because I, in fact, have ridden it as well. But I'm also aware and have personally dealt with the persons experiencing homelessness piece. And I've literally seen, and since I've been on council, we've had to deal with some persons experiencing homelessness commandeering our stops, and literally hanging blankets and legal discussions about whether we can get this person out of there, and complex strategies from the sheriff's department on how to approach those people, and not just the one, there was a couple, and repeat offenders, and they become territorial even over these stops. So I think the axle design offers a place for somebody to sit down and wait for the public transit to arrive. I'm kind of a fan of the light feature. In fact, I think the more light, the better around these stops. And I like the idea of the ability to be able to expand them and how simplistic that is, and frankly, the vandalism concern and the ongoing cost and the blight that will come from just vandalism to these stops, and literally the word shelter, we're talking about it. This isn't supposed to be a shelter. It's not. It's supposed to be a stop. It's supposed to be a temporary location for somebody to come, wait for the public transportation to arrive, and then go somewhere else. I worry about the two others, because when you say shelter, I see shelter. I see the situation we had with the wooden ones, where the gentleman just places his blanket across the front of it and commandeers that whole bus stop for nobody to use. And the point Eric brought up too about Axel, with somebody sitting down, grabbing your book, to be honest, if I go to a bus stop and somebody's sitting down, I'm not sitting down. I'm probably standing out on the side. And especially with everything going on in the world with pandemic-related stuff, I'm probably more likely not to sit down or want to be cooped up in somebody's shelter when they've commandeered it or they have their personal belongings stashed underneath it or whatever other issue. So, I'm favorable towards the axle design, and I like the idea that if there's a necessity for more than one, then so be it. We'll put two of them and they'll match. And I think it still allows the ability for folks with accessibility issues to be able to find shelter too. Or we could even fabricate a bridge between the two units to provide an expanded shelter if we needed to do that.
I do have one question on the lights for the axle, and that's that I see that it seems like it's a crosswalk style button that you press for a light. I'm assuming that it turns off after a certain amount of time. Do you happen to know if there's a lighting system, because it's solar, I'm sure it's limited, but if there is maybe an expanded solar array that might be able to power that, all night long?
We could find one. If that's what council wants, we can find one. This is just what was presented in the picture, but there's all different kinds of lighting fixtures and durations.
Yeah, I understand the piece about the security side of it, and if those lights aren't just as a convenience, but as more of a security feature, I would be more interested in it being on all night, just so somebody maybe feels a little bit safer being there and it's not a dark corner that they have to walk into.
Okay.
Sherry, do you have more to present by any chance? Or is it just
These are the
supporting?
three structures or styles that council expressed interest in at the last meeting. I do have, we could talk about bus benches a little bit more, but if the axle style is what you want, then.
Well, I
don't think
think
anybody
we've got
knows
that
that
yet.
Okay.
So can we talk about a couple things? I think you mentioned something, did you mention something about a change in ordinance or policy where we could enforce a no camping at a bus stop policy or ordinance? Is that a possibility? I know there's strategies of trying to convince people not to do that, but I'm talking about actually being able, and maybe Jeff knows more about this, but can we actually say, hey, this is a bus stop and, people want to wait for the bus, so you got to take the tent down?
Jeff, do you want to handle?
Yes, a bus stop should be used as a bus stop, and you can't have an ordinance that says no camping or using a bus stop for any purpose other than waiting for the bus. The enforcement would be to remove them from the bus stop, and they'll be on the sidewalk.
Okay,
but
and then
remove them from the sidewalk, or remove them from the bus stop, and then they wait on the sidewalk? Is that what we're saying? We're going to expect our sheriffs to do that? To move them to the sidewalk and say, we're going to take you away otherwise?
Well, we'll remove them from the bus stop if they're not using a bus stop for the purposes of a bus stop.
Is the sergeants here from the sheriff's department, I'm curious, would you guys use force to remove somebody from a bus stop if they were just camping there?
We would try not to, because force is the last thing we ever want to use, especially for something like this. Just somebody sleeping. Maybe we'll try to offer outreach, maybe another place where they could sleep, or maybe provide them with some resources instead.
So what you're saying is you're not going to physically remove somebody from a bus stop. It sounds like you're just going to try to verbally gain cooperation, but if they tell you no, that's it, and it's pretty much done.
If we remove somebody from here, where we're going to put them? Over here?
Right.
Back to the same problem. They're going to lay here. So homeless is homeless. It's everywhere. I mean, I don't think that was resolve the problem, because we're just relocating them. That's what we're doing. They need some resources.
Good point. Thank you.
Sherry, I know it doesn't rain that often, but the axle one does not provide any shelter for the rain.
Okay.
And I think that's a problem.
Okay.
Or the wind. I know it may be more convenient and easier to keep clean, but, when it does rain, people would like to have some kind of protection.
I'd like to see the parts of the presentation at least, and there's probably some that I don't know about, but talking about this particular configuration that you have up on the screen, you have that in the program, so I don't know what you want to tell us about that. And also about the benches that do have the anti-sleeping, things that you can put on there. And I'm not sure what else you have in your presentation, but I feel I haven't seen the whole thing yet.
Okay. Did want to mention that the city has received a grant from Foothill Transit for an amount of $40,000 for 2 bus stop locations on Bonita Avenue, just east of San Dimas Avenue. So that the $40,000 would pay for 2 bus stops or bus shelters of this variant. Also, in addition to that, the Gold Line, when they were doing the construction on Bonita Avenue near Cataract, they removed 2 bus shelters for that construction, and they are going to be placing the city standards bus shelter back in those locations. The Foothill Transit had asked them to enhance the bus shelters and make them larger, and that's where this picture came in. So that's one of the bus shelters. It's got the axle design that the Gold Line has placed in several other cities, and this is it's essentially a 16-foot long shelter. The benches, we can come up with different benches that would meet the criteria. But one of the interesting things that this presents is we have a bus shelter standard for the city that we have in most locations. But if you want to enhance a certain corridor, say the downtown corridor on Bonita with a higher grade shelter, that's an option. And I just want to go back to, before I make anybody sick with my, these are some of the bus stop locations on Bonita Avenue if you wanted to create a more enhanced corridor, although I will say that the bus shelter proposed by the Gold Line is much more expensive than what we would typically recommend in a normal bus stop. And then, so what we'd also want to establish from you is what types of amenities you would want at the shelter. Councilman Weber mentioned the light all night. That's something that definitely we can select and enhance the lighting. The other thing Councilman Bertone mentioned was you talked about perhaps having the panels as to provide additional shelter. That's something also that can be added if that's what you want in the shelter.
I can see where that would be a problem for graffiti, having a plastic thing on it. It's calling for someone to mark it.
So, and then if you like the design of the axle roof, we can look at creating a little bit larger roof so that it creates more of a rain-free area. We also create more shade. So we can look at that as well. If you want to go.
That slide there and the pluses and minuses of those particular anti-sleeping or anti-lying devices?
So when we're looking at benches, there's a couple areas that we want to consider. The mayor mentioned heat, and the metal benches get very hot. So we want to be very cognizant of that. We typically go with a recycled plastic material on the bench, especially if there's no shelter over it. The other thing we want to look at in a bench is skateboarding. They tend to try to, I don't know if it's called grinding or on the edges of the bus bench. So what we would go with is something like this, where you have a bench segmented into different or partitioned into different seating areas, and then you have a wraparound on the edge so that they can't get a a space to grind on, or a long distance to grind on. And then the other element on a bench that we need to explore a little bit more is trying to prevent a space for storing gear underneath the bench. So that, we're working with the homeless team to find some, they've mentioned installing a concrete bench so that there's no place to put underneath it. So it's a solid concrete, like a curb, only a little bit bigger. So that's an option that we can look at. The concern, though, when we're looking at bus shelters and bus stops, is that they do change. So Foothill Transit relocates their bus stops depending on ridership. So if a particular stop isn't getting enough board of lights, then they will relocate that to another place, where you mentioned where we like on Maymone, they'll have additional bus come in there, so.
So that would be our responsibility to move the bus stop if
It
Foothill
is.
Transit?
It is.
I know it's been a century since I worked in downtown, but we had this type of bench downtown, and we had the same issues with, if we're concerned about the homeless issues, we had the same type of issues in downtown Los Angeles. And it's amazing how innovative these folks can be to present a way to sleep, to lay down. They end up with cardboard, and they just load it up into whatever the basket they're using, cardboards, sleeping bags, anything else. So they can make that a flat surface, and they're a lot more comfortable than we give them credit for. They're more innovative than we give them credit for. So I understand when I'm looking at it, it's certainly not inviting to sleep on, but the reality is these people have nothing else, nowhere else to sleep. So, and we have to respect that. Remember, the one thing is these are unhoused residents in our community. So we do have to keep track of what we're doing with them and try we got to accommodate something, and the bus stop is not what we want to accommodate. We need to continue to reach out and figure out what a better way to handle this. So we need to just worry, in my opinion, we need to worry about a bus stop where people can come, sit down, wait for the bus, just like the two speakers prior said. That's the important part of this scenario. I just wanted one question on the axle, the center post there.
Yes.
How wide is that? Is that 4 inches, 6 inches? Where we talked about people could come in, sit down back to back?
Yes, it's about 6 to 8 inches, depending on what model you go with.
Could
And if you would like it larger, we can.
yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Could we look at something a little larger, a foot and a half, something like that in between? Because I know the concern's going to be, some people are going to have concerns about, they're sitting there back to back, and the woman's going to have her purse sitting next to her, and it's just going to be some concern. So I'm just wondering if we can innovatively do something to accommodate something like that.
Okay.
Just a curiosity, just like we were talking about maybe, a wider roof to, for rain and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of questions to be, I know that you guys have done a lot of work on this, but I think in my opinion, I believe we're a ways from coming up with something that would be practical or work.
Okay, well, if we can narrow it down to one design feature that you want, like whether it's an axle or a gable or a hip, that will help us so that we move forward and we can bring back a much more finished design. And
I have a number of comments and suggestions.
Okay.
But I'd like to know that we're done with the presentation, or not.
Basically, yes.
Okay, so there's no more pictures or anything like that?
There's no
Okay,
more pictures.
Great. So I have one question, and that I don't know where, and I've been riding buses off and on since I was a teenager, and long rides, short rides on public transportation with multiple stops and waiting and all that kind of stuff. Recently, I can't remember where I was actually, they had a system that was really great because, and I just wondered if Foothill had it, and Emmett, I should know, but I don't, but it was a digital display at each bus stop, whether you had a bench, a pole, or just a pole and nothing else, or a shelter that told you where the next bus was. I mean, it would literally have a map showing you where it was, or sometimes they'll have like an ETA that's when the next bus, and if it's a bus stop that serves multiple routes, it would say where those 3 buses might be as far as when they're going to arrive. There are also apps you can have on your phone, of course. And
John,
does Foothill have these things?
I can answer that question.
That's what I was.
And the only reason I can answer that question is we have the CEO of Foothill Transportation sitting in the lobby.
I know.
So, and he is shaking his head, yes.
Do we have those installed? The
certain places.
Displays?
Yes and no.
I wouldn't mind hearing about that.
I would be glad to hand it over.
Big fan of public transit, as Doran knows.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Doran Barnes, Chief Executive Officer of Foothill Transit, and also a resident of San Dimas. Great discussion tonight, and I really appreciate the interest. The bus stop is the front door to the transit system, and all the things that you're talking about, all these considerations from a design standpoint and from the standpoint of unintended consequences are really, really important. In terms of the technology, we do have real-time information. It's available on our website. We've actually made a huge investment in that real-time technology. In terms of getting it on stops, the challenge that we get into in terms of having it installed at bus stops is that you have to have constant power to power the equipment. The equipment is pretty expensive to put in, and it suffers from the same risk of vandalism that we see in other parts of the system. So we've been reluctant to install it on bus stop locations, except in incredibly busy locations where the investment warrants the information. What we push really heavy is to have riders and members of the community access that through a smartphone, through the real-time information that's available to them. That's really the most economical and most direct way to get that information out.
All right, great. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My comment about that is that whatever shelter design we pick should be adaptable. There should be a way to adapt it or use that kind of technology or things we can't even think about right now as part of the shelter. That's why the one with the green roof and had the map and, those things are always, I remember riding the bus where, you don't know exactly where you're going, and you're choosing between one route that goes over here and another one that comes later, but it goes shorter, and you're trying to figure out, how to get to Brea Mall from Santa Ana or whatever it is. These kinds of things are nice, even if we don't do them initially, at some stops especially, those kind of amenities are nice, in my opinion. So that was the question about the technology and just going forward on that.
Now that you bring that up, actually, it brings up a pretty good point about integrating even the smartphone app. Nowadays, QR codes are everywhere, and we could get a sign, put it on the post with a QR code so that even if you're unaware that a bus map is available on your phone, you can scan it with your phone, pull it right up, and download it, and be in the loop.
That is an awesome idea for the bus people to think about. Because, because then, as you're saying, you don't need a big display. It's not, can it be vandalized? Yes, somebody can write over it, but I think we need to be aware and concerned about the downsides of anything we do. But I really think we need to be thinking about the bus riding public here, okay? We don't want the bus stops to become homeless shelters, but there are shelters for people who are riding the bus. And some people choose to ride the bus. Some people have to ride the bus. And they should be given as much respect and nice experience as somebody driving a car and having a nice median and, good signalized intersections and everything else. So for the type of, from the various discussions we've had, I understand the thing about the vandalism and the panels, because the panels are a great idea. The bus stop is a shelter for bus riders, and it should protect them from the sun and the rain. So if you've noticed on all those pictures you showed, the roofs, if you want to go to any one of them or any combination, the roof is up here, and the shade isn't on the bench in all those pictures. And having ridden the bus so many times, it's like there's a roof, but that's not doing anything for shade. It's better for rain. Now, it can possibly do it for shade. I was wondering if, for weatherizing or making it more weather, maybe having, the roof and then a back part that extends down 6-8 inches, that's just solid metal or something like that, so you get a little bit of a more, if the rain's going this way or that way. And I would also be interested in the larger roof, if it's possible, to extend out a little bit farther. So instead of 4 feet, maybe it's 5 or whatever, so that people are more protected. In this particular picture, and one of your other pictures about the benches, we obviously, or I think we need the anti-sleeping and anti-skateboarding kinds of installation. But I like the one on the top left, and why is that? It has a back. And again, we're talking about people who are having to wait for the bus, and while we want to encourage them to sit down there. As far as numerous people being on the same bench, there are many cases, in fact, a lot of cases, and if you're at a busy place and you've got a bench, you're going to find multiple people sitting on that bench and a lot of other people standing around. But if you're a couple and you're going to sit down side by side on the bench, if you're a parent with a child, you may want to sit down together on that bench. If you're a disabled person and so you have a caregiver that's with you, say you're developmentally disabled, and part of the program for that person, as is with my sister, they have a caregiver who goes with them to all these places, so they sit down. And we don't want to make the person with a walker stand there if there's not enough room. Now, a lot of times people will get up to let the person sit down, but we want to provide shade, a comfortable experience, and a place that's welcoming to sit down. So whatever thing we choose, we should look at it with that kind of a lens, that we're welcoming the transit public. And as Doran said, it's the gateway, it's literally the doorstep to the bus that you're going to be getting on. And I like the idea that Ryan brought up last time, if you have time, maybe you'll go into Starbucks or something else to get a bite to eat, and that's fantastic. But a lot of times, that's not really where the bus stop is. It may not be near a business that you're going to want to visit while you're waiting for the bus. And if you're very experienced with a particular route, you will know that you can be there at a certain specific time. But a lot of time, you don't know when that bus is coming. And so you're not going to take the time, you're not going to be able to wander around. You're going to stay at the bus stop. And you may be there for 10, 15 minutes. And on a hot day, that's uncomfortable. So we need to do both things. Keep the homeless or others from loitering and turning the bus shelters into, something with a lot of graffiti, vandalism, other things attached to it, all that kind of stuff. But for the 99.9%, 99.999%, I would say, from the ridership you talked about at Target and over there by Target, Mamone, I'm not sure if we've ever had a homeless problem at that stop, but I don't know how many riders you said we had. We had thousands.
18,000.
And so for those thousands of people, we want to make the bus stop a nice place to be. That's my thought. I like the square ones better. I think they provide, it's a sturdier thing, the bench is longer, so that you can do exactly what I was talking about, having multiple people sitting on that bench where they're not right on top of one another. And in fact, those two benches right there are too short, in my opinion. I like the ones that go all the way across, like the other picture you were showing. So when I look at this, I look at both sides, and one side, the one side that is very important is making that shelter attractive, both to people who are just driving or walking by, and making it inviting for those who are taking the bus.
You know, Sherry, I think that I agree with a lot of what you say, but we have to be considerate of what's going to happen to it after a while. The barriers on the benches, I think, are very important. And it actually makes it easy for people, more than one person, to sit down if you're reluctant to sit down on a bench with someone else. So I think that's very important.
Okay.
I think in hearing some of the points that John brings up, you know, if we should be thinking about it and being as empathetic to people in their car, then, and money wasn't an option, I guess, then I would say, Sherry, we should, all four walls need to be enclosed. We need to look at an air conditioning unit because it gets very hot, and we do have cooling centers. And we also need to figure out the technology, because I can agree with John that we need to look at access control for the bus stops for riders, because public safety is a point. In a world where we didn't have to worry about money, then the 100% way to solve this is simply to control access to the bus stops so that truly riders ride. And we can do it. Now, unless we're willing to put our money where our mouth is and execute that investment in technology, the Wi-Fi infrastructure that it would take, assuming people don't have cellular devices that can get onto a network, and the access control and electricity it's going to take to be able to get in there so that we really have secure bus stops. We're still going to have to deal with the external vandalism, I suppose, but it would really provide a true secure place. Now, what experience tells us, and I know you know because you've ridden, and you've been up to San Francisco, and I've lived in downtown LA for a little while. What's really going to happen, the truth of the matter is that people will take over those bus stops that are experiencing homelessness, and we've seen it. In downtown LA, you can drive down right now and see it. And it will dissuade people from riding. It will dissuade people. The Target bus stop on the north side, actually on both sides, I've literally seen people with their cart sitting there and just there for 2-3 days, hanging out, waiting. And you know who's not there? Other people.
She just said that 16,000, I don't know what the ridership was, it was thousands.
Well, how many of those, and I'm glad you bring that up, how many of those are unique riders? Was that data sorted? Or is that just generally how many people rode? So it could be the same person twice a day, 4 times a day, I guess, maybe 5, depending on where they needed to go. So it could be theoretically unique ridership, that'd be the real number, and then that data is flawed. So, or it sounds like it is flawed at this point, so that data needs to be sorted out into what unique ridership is.
You know, Ryan, you make a good point. When homeless take over a bus stop, it does make other people not want to ride the bus at all.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to think about.
Yeah. So if the mayor, if your take on it was that the axle design is amenable to you, I'm in agreement with that. I would be interested in different sizing options, and expansion perhaps of the roof, ensuring that it's not perforated or, you know, I think you said it's could be solid, or you're proposing metal. You know, and I like the notion of the lighting features. I think we have to make a decision on, you know, number one is, what has experience told us? And we can look at all cities all over the place, and cities that have robust mass transportation. They're the cities dealing with the homeless issue right now at all of these places. And I feel like the people, and I know that the people that I've talked to specifically about this have all said, a bus stop's a bus stop. It's a temporary place for you to go, wait for the bus. And most people here that are commuting, let's be honest, we're not a big bustling city where there are all these options to go to. Most people that are going to a bus stop are doing it as a mode of transportation to work or to school. And so generally they know the time, they need to be there. They know, hey, it's going to be about this time, and hopefully Doran's operations on time. But, you know, they go anticipating, planning, and knowing, you know. So on one hand, I'm absolutely happy to entertain a full, robust discussion on the perfect bus stop, because I think it could be done. If cities really wanted to do it, I think 100% it could absolutely be done. But the reality, I think, when you look at the cost-benefit analysis and ridership, and even dwindling numbers on some of the mass transportation lines in general, like Metrolink, you don't see that. So the next best option is to create a situation that meets the requirement of the task, which is to provide a place that is safe, that detracts from the homeless, the threat of homelessness, the points that were brought up about public safety and theft and vandalism, you know, minimizing that impact on the community. And we had this challenge, and I don't know if Jeff was here, at the city attorney at the time, but when that bus stop on San Dimas Avenue was taken over by the homeless gentleman, it was almost a 3-month process to figure out the legal strategy and challenges. We don't have housing available. The sheriff's department was not going to use force then to physically remove somebody from a bus stop. And so it creates a whole host, no pun intended, but a host of issues. And we have to be mindful that the Gold Line's coming. And that is going to bring with it some challenges too. And the one thing people have all said, very in touch with people here on this, is that they are seriously concerned about exponential growth in homelessness when the Gold Line comes. So setting up shelters throughout downtown and elsewhere, to me, is counterproductive. We have as the mayor pointed out, we have our homeless plan. We should stick to our homeless plan and work to execute those. Keep bus stops, not shelters.
Sherry, talking about the axle, just one, and when we discussed it, you talked about there's possibility of modification at the top, making it wider or larger.
Absolutely.
Maybe down the backside, some skirting or something like that, and something to divide the people sitting there from immediately sitting on a 4-inch post. Okay, sitting something backwards there. I think, to me, that it has something to explore. Do we know where these bus stops, these shelters are manufactured?
I don't offhand. Brasco, a lot of them were manufactured in the Midwest. So, and there's some like Tolo or is actually in San Bernardino or Riverside County. So
do we actually know where a example of this bus stop, this bus shelter is, that we could travel out, or if you wish to?
Yes,
I mean, many of us
I'll
have
find
gone to other places and looked at, something that happened. I know that John's driven out certain places. I know that Dennis, and I know that I have, and, could go out and take a look at it. I mean, just is to look at examples. It's very difficult to look at a picture, in my mind, when we're looking at least that particular picture. I think we provide what the speakers who spoke to us earlier, we provide something with some type of shelter. We provide a location for them to sit and wait for the bus, and we tax Foothill to be here on time. Which is impossible, but the reality is, I know that the bus drivers are under a certain amount of scrutiny, so that they need to be it as long as they're safe, and that's our number one goal, is to be safe and to provide safety for our people coming there, not only our unhoused residents, but the customer that's trying to ride the bus and needs that. Nobody wants the little, elderly person who's got a walker to be standing there, whatever. So, I mean, I'd be interested in those questions. If you could come up with some type of an idea for me. Now, I'm only one of 5. Any 4 of these guys, or 2 of them, or 3 of them, can make a decision on their own what they want to do, if they want to go a different direction. I'd just like to see what could be produced. Because I just believe that the housing of the larger kind of four corners is just going to be inviting to a problem that potentially could happen. Maybe it won't. Let's hope we come up with an answer that's going to solve this problem. But we all know we have this problem ongoing throughout the 18 bus stops that we have now, other than the ones that don't have roofs, So.
Yeah, you talked about the axle design, and we've actually seen two axle designs in these pictures.
Mhm.
There's this one with the back-to-back seating, or however that seating is, which looks inadequate to me. But there's the one that the Gold Line, I guess, was telling us they like.
That one there?
That one right there. So that one is way different than the one you just saw.
Yeah, that's it.
Showed. This has the one post, as you're saying, so it makes it difficult to enclose it with anything else. If you're creative and inventive, you could do anything with this. I mean, I could turn this into my workshop if I wanted to. But this is a better design axle-wise, if you want axle, than the one in the other picture, in my opinion. It has the benches with the backs, and what I would do in this case, I would extend, and I'm not sure if we need a curved roof. I mean, it could still be a squarish type of roof, but if it went down the back a little bit, you would get a little bit more shade. You see where the shade is right there? Well, in this case, the patron is going to be, the shade is on their head in the back. Think if they're turned around, which is the case a lot of the times, now that they're looking right into the sun. But if you had it a little more down on front and back or something, you might be able to increase the protection from shade and weather.
Okay.
For shade and weather.
I think the one thing to that with the other axle design is, depending on the time of day, you can change the direction you're sitting. That you can't do on this. You're committed to wherever you're sitting. And I'd love most people who are at these stops, actually, if you've ridden them for some time, they bring with them their umbrellas, usually. And they'll actually just pop them up because they're anticipating that stop where they weren't generous enough to provide a canopy.
Or they'll get up off the seat, if the shade's in the back, if it's in their eyes and the shade's in the back, they'll stand in back.
Right.
A lot of
Then
them.
they have to stand.
Yeah, and if you look at this design and we look at the bench with a back, and you could add another arm, and put, instead of three, you could put a center iron in there, so you'd break up 3 different locations. Then you could probably do something to prevent the laying there, unless it's a real skinny person, then he could get between so I couldn't do it. But the reality is, you could look at something like that where you had a bench with a back. I'm seeing that still tend to think, for me, I'd like to look at the other stuff that you come up with, but on the other hand, I'm really wide open on what's best.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion that we move forward with looking at the Brosco International Axle Retreat aluminum structure design with solar light, which would be the one indicated in the lower photo there, and explore all of the features and configurations that have been mentioned specific to that design, and have those brought back for council to further evaluate.
And especially to expand the roof so you have more protection.
I agree.
Do we have a second on that?
Second.
Any further discussion?
Sure. I think that another option would be one of those squarish shelters with a more attractive roof without any panels. I mean, it would just, it's like the axle, except it would have 2 legs on each side and essentially be, it's hard to tell exactly what that axle looks like. It's a little dark, and I can't see the contrast between what that roof looks like. So, I mean, I'm open to looking at it, but I'm just trying to think of something. If I'm thinking about some of these along Bonita through downtown, what is going to complement and enhance our downtown? So, I'm willing to take a look at the axle, but I still think it might have some deficiencies.
I agree with you to an extent with the roof style. I mean, I would love to have it more of a gable, and I think I was one of the ones that that asked for the gabled stuff to get thrown into this discussion. I at this point, I think we've talked about a lot of changes to the standard shelters that are here, and I think Sherry brought up a really good point in that the economy of the shelters is that they're prefabricated and they're made in this same manner, you know, in bulk. And as soon as you start modifying them, my concern would be that we would be getting into a situation where they rapidly rise to the cost of the shelters that are just not economically feasible to be installed. And I'm wondering, even, you know, making the changes to the axle, whether it be making the cover bigger, we might run into a situation where it's cheaper, rather than modifying the cover to be bigger, it's cheaper just to buy two of them. And then that way you get the larger coverage, and you also get more seating. So it's just something to consider.
Even if you did that, the gable design, and my hang up with it is, to the point about fabrication, is the complexity of being able to merge that. So I mean, even let's say if you considered on the axle going to a cable design, and then you bought two of them, and then you wanted to just bridge them together so that you could have a waiting area for someone perhaps in a wheelchair, it would be just very simple to fabricate a piece of sheet metal or whatever and just literally weld it across to create that space, versus the gable design where you're going to have to figure out how to fabricate that in a way that's not going to match the slope, and so you're not going to have consistency. So you have the most expansion opportunity with the axle. Even if you wanted three for some reason, we had a bus depot.
You bring up a great point. I'm noticing that the two upper pictures have that shorter bench, which I was saying it should be longer. However, I think that gap there is actually made for somebody in a wheelchair, is what that is for. I don't see that in the lower picture. I mean, there's obviously lots of space around there for somebody to, but they're not under a shelter necessarily.
Well, we don't know how long that shelter is, though.
And in fact, somebody could back right up to where there's not a seat protruding and probably be sheltered.
So, yeah, I mean, as you look at the dimensions of the roof as it is, it's standard, it's actually a little bit bigger than the handy hut in width. I mean, it's a 6 foot by 6 foot square, but the handy hut's 7.5 by 2 feet 8 inches. So it's actually a little bit bigger. I think the picture might be a little deceptive, which I like the mayor's point about finding one that we can go look at.
But I think it's important to remember what you said is that all the alterations we do on it is going to make it more expensive.
Right. Well,
and that's it. You know.
I was going to say, call the question, Mayor.
Okay, well, before I call the question, obviously, we're looking at pictures, okay? And I got to tell you, Sherry, I'd like to go out and see that, and I'd suggest
me too,
an offer to take anyone, and if we can do whatever, I'll be more than happy to buy lunch for you, Sherry, for everybody, for us to go look at this, and I think that might help us out a little bit better. That's just my offer, but the reality is I'm more looking at that axle than anything else, but I need those ideas.
Before we settle on a brand, can we go with the style, the architectural style, so that we can introduce some other brands? Then if this is where you want to go, and you want to have there's many different options where most of these are 4 by 8 essentially. So, but if you're talking about expanding the shelter to 6 foot wide, there's a lot of different brands that have this type of axle. So if that would be one of the suggestions I would make, is that if we can not limit it to a brand, that frees us up to find a lot of different things that you're asking for.
I agree with that. I think just that suggestion's about an hour past due. I think that's a great idea. So.
I'm going to go ahead and support the motion reluctantly, because I think there's a better design out there. And if you're looking around for designs, it really should be something that complements the streets of San Dimas. But I'm willing to look at the axle and especially with whatever modifications, I think you've heard a lot of comments and ideas, and if you can incorporate some of my general ideas about it being, good for the traveling public, then we'll see what you come up with, and, but for now, I'll be open-minded, let's put it that way.
I'm only willing to accept your suggestion on the motion, provided that it does not deviate significantly from that design, nor does the roofing change. So if you can find something that has similar design elements and materials and so on and so forth, fine. But for some of the reasons previously discussed, compatibility, expansion, etc., not interested in anything other than what's similar.
Okay.
Cool.
Well, I think it would be good to be open to
I'm not.
things.
That's not the motion.
I understand.
And I understand where you're going.
So
Call the question, Mayor.
Let me just finish by saying that I will not support the motion because I think at this point, we haven't seen things in person. Those pictures are...
Point of order, Mayor. Please
one-sided.
call the question.
Okay. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
You did hear no. No, yeah. 4-1, Councilman Ebner voting no.
Thank you.
One thing I just wanted to comment, I think everybody up here on this dais has a concern for the traveling public and doing the right thing and making sure that that what we're doing here is for the right reasons. And I kind of bothers me that that someone's concerned that we're not. Everybody up here wants the right thing that's going to be the best for this community. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move forward. Item number 2. Okay, approve the resolution 2022-21 approving engineering report for the Boulevard Assessment District, declaring intentions to levy and collect an increased assessment and fixing time and place for a public hearing for Boulevard Open Space Maintenance District Number 1, Track 32818 Boulevard. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I'm Scott Wasserman, Director of Parks and Recreation. And as the mayor mentioned, this item pertains to one of 2 landscaping districts that the city operates in the city of San Dimas. And what we're asking you to do this evening, as the mayor mentioned, was part of the process. I think about a month or 2 ago, the city council authorized the creation of a plan or the development of a plan, an engineer's report, which details the expenses that we're likely to encounter in administering the landscaping district. What we're asking the city council to do this evening is to approve the engineer's report, declare the intent to levy and collect the increased assessment for the fiscal year, and then set the date and the time for the public hearing. And this item, this is called the Boulevard Assessment District. This is where the 2 assessment districts differ a little bit. The Boulevard Assessment administratively is a little bit simpler, a little streamlined, because in 2006, the residents in the 19 homes that comprise the Boulevard Assessment District gave permission to the city to increase the assessment with the consumer price index, provided that the increase does not exceed 7%. We found that the consumer price index for the previous year was 7.4%, and accordingly, staff is recommending that we increase the assessment by 7%, which would be a $37 increase. This is an annual assessment, so $37 a year would be the increase. That would be about $3 per month. And I'll see if council has any questions before I move on to, the next landscape district.
Any questions? No?
Do you want to approve them both at the same time or one separately?
It's really how it pleases the council and the mayor.
I would move approval
Just
of this.
one at a time.
Okay.
Please, thank you.
Dennis is making a motion for approval.
Second.
Any further conversation? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, it moves 5-0. Okay, we'll go on to Number 2, approve resolution 2022-22, approve engineering report for the Northwoods Assessment District declaring intention to levy and collect an assessment and fixing a time and place for a public hearing for Northwoods Open Space Maintenance District Number 1, Annexation Number 3, Tract 32841, Northwoods.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. So I mentioned that these two landscape districts had similarities and differences. Similarity is in the process. Tonight we're asking the city council to approve the engineer's report and also to set the time and the place for the public hearing. What is a little bit different about this, Northwoods, this particular landscaping district is actually on private property. And it's private property where the city assesses 38 homes, and in return for the assessment, obviously the city maintains a landscaping district. So what's different about this is that A, it's on private property, and what this does to the process is it's a little bit different. So staff, in addition to asking the city council to approve the resolution and set the public hearing, we're asking for council direction on how to address the anticipated deficit, the difference between the assessments and the revenue that we collect and the expense to maintain the landscaping district. And we believe respectfully that the two directions that council may provide, one may be simply to, at this time, right-size the maintenance of the district to match the revenues that we have. So that could potentially be seen as a service decrease. The second option would be to direct staff to use general funds to supplement the operation of this particular landscape district. That was one item where we're seeking direction. And then the second item is, because this is on private property, and this, I believe, was created in the 70s, this landscaping district, circumstances are very different now than they were in the 70s. So staff is respectfully requesting City Council, if you're interested, to direct staff to engage residents in the possible dissolution of the maintenance district. And this is something that would be done likely with the consent of the homeowners. Alternatively, if council is not interested in that option, or if the residents are not interested in that option, then we would proceed with the regular process, which would likely be an increase in the assessment.
Do the residents have to agree to the increase?
You know, I'm going to defer that to the city attorney.
Yeah, we would have to go through the Prop 218 procedure, and a majority of the residents would be able to protest and object to the increase, but otherwise, no.
So the mechanics of that, there's a public hearing, the council will then act one way or the other, and then there's a protest vote at that by the residents, or does the protest vote happen before the public hearing?
The protest would have to be brought to the public hearing.
Brought to the public hearing, and can they do that via a petition, or do we have to have 19 or 20 homeowners come up here and protest in person?
They can do it by sending in their written protest, and then we would count the protests at the public hearing.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. Any further questions?
Have you had any discussions with them in terms of their preference or interest?
We have not yet, only because the point in the process where we are planning to do that is after the city council establishes the date of the public hearing. Then we would reach out to them. We would send them something, letting them know where we are in the process and highlighting their opportunities to provide input to the city council.
Well, I don't, I'm not supportive of a service reduction, so there's that. But on the flip side, I would be supportive of dissolving the district but understanding that in doing so, essentially, their HOA picks this up, right? I mean, that's what we're saying?
That's correct. And if they don't have an HOA, then they would need to form one in order to assume this responsibility.
Yeah, they do not
Piggyback
have.
on that,
Yeah.
do they have to agree to dissolving the district?
I would say yes. I mean, if the choice is dissolve the district or actually, I should defer that to the city attorney just to be sure I'm correct before I speak.
I'm not sure on the answer to that, but I believe
Well, I mean,
that
what
they have
happens
to
if they
agree.
say, we don't want an increase, and we don't want to dissolve the district?
Very likely scenario, I imagine.
You know,
And if they don't have an HOA, that's one of the tracks that the city was trying to figure out what to do before my time, before Dennis's time on the council. So some didn't have anything, some had this kind of a situation where we figured the city would kind of take on the role of the HOA for landscaping anyway. And finally, at some point, I'm not sure where it was, there was a policy, and it may have been written, may not have been written, that they're going to have to have an HOA if they have a development in Via Verde. And from that point on, everybody's got an HOA.
And if they voted for the HOA, would it be a simple majority or 2/3, or what would that be? Those are questions that I think we'd have to resolve, because it's going to come down to a question.
Yeah, I mean, is there a requirement? I mean, can the city require they have an HOA? I mean, like in this scenario.
When we're approving the development project, we can require that they have an HOA, but this is a development that's already in place. So
An example that is often given for this situation is that,
it happens that frequently?
If you look at the slopes of this HOA, not HOA, but the Northwoods district, those are all privately owned slopes, all the way down to, is it Palomares, whatever street is running along there on the foot of it. And so they're maintained in somewhat of a standard way. Over time, as we're finding out now, the amount of work we could put into it, amount of upkeep, has decreased because we didn't increase the fees. So we've done less and less on that slope. But it is still under the control of the city, so it's got sort of a uniform look. The development that doesn't have this or an HOA is along Via Verde. So if you go from the freeway down Via Verde and you look to your right, you'll see what that looks like. Some people have got vineyards, some people have got weeds, some people have got manicured land. So that's what we would be, because they're not going to want an HOA. They're going to want to do it themselves, which means they would probably have to put fencing in and everything else. But it would look similar to what's on Via Verde. And so when we talk about what the consequences might be, we can probably count on it being somewhat like that. So, and that's not necessarily good or bad. If that's not a problem, looking like it does on that one stretch of Via Verde, then no problem.
We're talking between the freeway,
from
San
San
Dimas
Dimas
Avenue,
Avenue to
south down to
20.
20 to 20.
The only
That
difference
shopping center.
is that this is steeper.
And this is even steeper, right?
This is even steeper, and so you can't use the property for anything, it's so steep.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're confronted with, so at least on the issue of no service decrease, so I guess I'm saying I'm okay with supplementing whatever needs to be done, unfortunately. But on the other hand, I would almost think that we should approach them and say, hey, we're either going to increase this, or you guys could form an HOA, and they're already paying the money, so you could form an HOA, elect not to have an increase, understand what the CC&Rs are going to be in the end, and then self-govern the maintenance of that slope, and you may elect not to ever have a thing again, understanding that you may have to have your reserve funds in order in case that slope gives. But that would be their burden at that time, and they would not see any increases, and they'd have local control over that. I mean, I think I'd be inclined, if I was a resident there, to say, oh, then I don't want an increase, do the damn thing.
That was a well-articulated explanation of the choices that lie ahead for the residents. And my understanding is that prior to my time with the city, this decision came up, and they did decide they could get a better deal, pay a lower assessment or a lower fee by forming an HOA and hiring a landscaping company. After going out and doing the math and doing a little research, they ended up coming back to the city and accepting
the increase.
assessment. Yeah.
Well, then then it sounds, history repeats itself. It's the same layup then, right? That's where we're at. Although they could very well decide not to do an HOA.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see the proposed increased assessment here if they were to bear the burden, but it looks like it might be about $130 or so for each. If we're saying $5,000 is the amount that we would need to make up, so that would push them over $1,000, whereas they're like right at 900 right now, almost.
That's about right.
Oh, I'm sorry. That is about right?
That's about right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More or less. Yeah.
More or less.
So what I've heard from one council member was regarding the question of addressing the deficit. What I've heard from one council member is to use general funds to supplement the service to this landscaping district. Is that a council consensus?
Not to use it or to use it?
To use it so that the service level doesn't decline.
I'd see if we could split the difference myself.
I agree with
Go
John
in
on that.
halvesies.
I agree with John on that one.
Approach them
and is that, and does anybody know, is that the Dan Hargis track?
Dan Hargis, Calle Alto, that's the main street through there, yeah.
If we did that, isn't that still going to end up going out to them to vote, and they're all going to protest and basically say, nope?
I can't speak on the outcome. I don't know. So
But
we'll
that's the
reach
process,
out.
right?
That is the process. That could potentially happen.
And then we just hit them with the increase, despite them all coming out here and telling us, don't do it.
Yeah,
Well, after the public hearing, we can go any route. We could go supplementing them completely. We could say,
I think the thing is to get the public hearing going, and then we'll go from there.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right.
And you'll figure out when to set the public hearing?
Yes, it's actually in your motion to set the public hearing for May 24th.
Mr. Mayor.
Actually, not a motion. Nobody's made a motion.
Why wouldn't we just then
recommendation
just move forward with the increase that's needed? And if you're willing to compromise to half, start with what's needed and pull back.
Yeah, I was just thinking that exact same thing.
Mr. Mayor, I have to interject. Can I do a point of order? This item is agendized as passing a resolution continuing the fee. It's not agendized as consideration of increasing the fee. And so we have to be very careful that we focus on that item. So my recommendation, given the conversation, is first consider approving the resolution and the engineer's report and setting the date of the public hearing for the purposes of continuing the assessment, and then providing direction to the city staff to come back to the council to discuss other alternative options, whether it could be consideration of an increased fee, consideration of dissolution, and any other options, so that we can properly inform the residents that we're actually going to be discussing that at a public meeting, so they have an opportunity to come and address the council.
Council didn't bring up any increases.
So you're saying set the public hearing now without an increase, and then when do they find out that they're going to get an increase?
My understanding is this has to be levied, and you have to take action to levy this on an annual basis.
Yes.
And this is just to set the fee at what it is today. And so if there's a consideration, knowing that there's about a $5,000 deficit in terms that the city has to supplement if it maintains its services, that we want to consider recouping that in the form of an increased assessment, we can come back and have that conversation and get direction from council if their choice is to increase that assessment, and then go through the Prop 218 process at that point.
Got it.
Okay, so basically,
That's fine.
in plain English, the motion is going to be just to approve your recommendations as made, with the exception of saying that we're not going to use general fund monies, and we're going to move forward with having you bring back a discussion for a public hearing to be able to seek recuperating the deficit.
I don't think I understood that well. I think the recommendation is, yes, proceed with continuing the assessment as it's been in place for the last 40 years. And then the second piece would be giving direction to staff of what, how in terms of implementation of the service do you want to proceed? We're either continuing to supplement with the general fund the service, or reducing the service, or start the conversations with the residents about a possible dissolution or Prop 218 increase.
That second part, when would that be happening? I mean, would that be folded into the public hearing?
No, we would go back as staff and work with residents in terms of options and bring something back to staff. We would just need direction to consider it, because the council could today just say, no, we want to just continue with the fee and continue the service, and we don't want any difference. But what I'm hearing is, we don't want to reduce the service, but we also have to consider the cost to the general fund associated with that service, and we may be considering an alternative.
Well, I'm okay with that, although I remember in the past, this fee has increased at one time or another. This particular one that doesn't have the built-in. So I don't remember having a public hearing that we're not increasing it and then somehow increasing it later. I think it was during that public hearing, which, as we discussed before, is the point at which we would also consider the objections. So I'm trying to figure out how we're going to have a public I think the end goal is to have a public hearing with an increase in it, and then have that public hearing. Then the council would discuss.
I do recall a couple of the landscape maintenance districts in the last few years where it'd be on here, we'd open the public hearing, close the public hearing, and I think it generally was a CPI increase, and we just went on. Like there wasn't a big to-do, but the CPI increase was pre-218, and so it just was commensurate. So this is not that way, is what I'm understanding.
That's correct. This is not automatically tied to the CPI. The Boulevard District, the first one we discussed, is tied to the CPI.
Okay, well, let me do the easy stuff first. I'll make a motion to approve staff's recommendation, item number 1, which was to approve the engineer's report and declare an intent to collect an assessment for the fiscal year 2022, 2023, and conduct a public hearing on May 24, 2022 for Open Space Maintenance District Number 1, Annexation Number 3, Track 32, 480 Northwoods.
I agree. Second.
All right.
Any further discussion?
Why do you ask?
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
I move that we adopt Resolution 2022-22, Open Space Maintenance District Number 1, Annexation Number 3, and then we can read the resolution. I'm not going to.
A resolution of the City Council of the City of San Dimas, County of Los Angeles, State of California, approving the engineer's report and declaring its intention to levy and collect an assessment for fiscal year 2022-23 pursuant to the Landscape and Lighting Act of 1972 and Article 13D of the California Constitution, and fixing a time and place for a public hearing for hearing objections for Open Space Maintenance District Number 1, Annexation Number 3, Tract 32841 Northwoods.
I move we waive further reading and adopt.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, and then if I think I understand the last piece of what John was bringing up, then I would move, if we're all on the same page about this, I think we are, move that council directs staff to, in light of the deficit, pursue means for recuperating the deficit funds from those in the maintenance district in the form of an increased, or we would call it special assessment in the HOA world. I don't know what you call it here. Tax, I guess. Assessment. And set a public hearing on a future date. or do I need to give you a date?
I think if the council's given us direction to engage the residents with the intent of ensuring that the subsidy is addressed, we can just engage the residents.
Oh, very well. Okay, well,
That's all we were asking for, is just direction to make sure that's the direction we wanted to go.
Okay.
So to clarify the motion, I guess, the motion's generally to give you direction to engage with the residents in the maintenance district to be able to recuperate the deficit costs.
I think the direction's pretty clear, no motion's necessary. It's that just engage the residents in terms of finding a way to cover that difference, and then we can bring an item forward with a recommendation to the council.
All right, withdraw on the motion.
We're good.
All right. Anything further?
That one was painful.
It was a little painful.
That was more interesting than the bus stops. Come on.
All right, let's move on to...
Thank you, Council.
Item number 4, discussion and direction of amendments to the nomination/appointments process for city boards, commissions, and committees as they relate to districts.
Mr. Mayor, before staff gets moving on that, I would actually move that we table this item to a date uncertain in the future, given the fact that council, the city, is currently transitioning to districts and has not yet completed that process, as well as some discussions with staff that there may be some revisions that they're interested in as well that may be more warranted once we get a little further down the line. So if no one's opposed, I would propose tabling this item to a date 90 days or further out.
I'm not opposed to it.
All right. Do we need a motion on that, or just that's consensus?
You should make a motion.
I move we table that item to a date not yet certain.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, 5-0. You're right, it was painful. Oral communications. Members of the audience, speakers are limited to 3 minutes, or as may be determined by the chair. Anyone wishing to speak to the council? Yes, sir.
I will be brief for a change. I know we cannot talk because of the Brown Act, but I would like a quick show of hands. Has anybody on the council read Metro's latest supplemental environmental impact report, number 3, relating to the removal of the parking lot? Mr. Vienna? Very good. Nobody else. It's been out for a month, folks, and it's got problems. Now, we don't have time to go into that tonight, but I've taken the liberty of summarizing the problems. I sent an email to each one of you outlining them. I know Mr. Ebner has read it. I don't know if anybody else did. Some of you might be like me. You like reading things on paper rather than on a monitor. Here it is on paper. And my hope is in 2 weeks, we could go into this in more depth.
You could give that to Mr. McKinney, please. Thank you. Thanks for hanging on so late.
I do find these.
Thank you. Take care, sir.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, because it is pertinent, the city did provide a quite extensive response to the goal line with regards to that supplemental environmental, highlighting a lot of issues that we're asking them to consider in pre-certification at EIR.
It was several pages long. It was a very long response.
Correct. We identified a large number of issues.
Super. Okay. Anyone else wishing to speak to the council? Seeing none, city manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll go quickly. We were happy to see Ms. Marilyn Sparks receive an award from our assemblyman. Numerous individuals, both from the city and from the business community, made that nomination, so that's fantastic. And we'll be celebrating her tomorrow at 5 o'clock on the Walker House patio for an open to the public event. The Chamber of Commerce has scheduled the candidates forum for candidates for the next election for May 5th at 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. So that will be coming up next month. At the end of this month, on Saturday, April 30th, at Civic Center Park, we will be having an Arbor and Earth Day event. And so that's something we can bring up at the next meeting to remind folks. We publicize that online. Our librarian has mentioned regarding the opening to the library. We also received word from the county librarian herself that they're hoping for a soft opening of the library in the first week of June. There's a number of closeout items that need to occur with the contractors, and the contractors have a date certain that they need to respond to any outstanding items. And so we're hoping that this is not going to continue to get extended out, since the last time the estimate we received was the library was going to open in March. Today I attended with a number of council members and the mayor the State of the District for Bonita Unified event. It was a fantastic event. It was wonderful to see the impacts that faculty and staff have in a number of communities, and the connection between all our organizations, the City of Laverne, the City of San Dimas, with the school district, and the high quality that the education from the institution, it was incredible to see some of the data that was coming out about how well our students do, especially in the area of literacy, which we ranked extremely high, which was fantastic. That also reminds me that we have scheduled our State of the City address to be June 30th, that Thursday at 9 a.m., and so that will be coming up in a couple of months. In terms of the Gold Line, there are two updates. San Dimas Avenue is scheduled to reopen on May 6th, and then 3 days later on May 9th, San Dimas Canyon Road will be closing for a period of 4 months. That concludes my update.
Thank you. City Attorney?
Nothing tonight, Mayor.
Members of the council members report on meetings attended at the expense of the local agency. Seeing none. John?
Thanks for the updates from Nora and a reminder from Chris on the library reopening. For some reason, that's getting a lot of, I think people are getting more and more anxious as time goes on. So that's good. So at least just one thing, and that was the Gold Line and more importantly, the city yard. The city has provided, as Chris alluded, to a very strong response to the SEIR3, Supplemental Environmental Impact Report, third iteration, with a lot of reasons why having the parking on the park and ride lot, at least the way the Gold Line is envisioning it, is not that great of an idea. It's hard to imagine the Gold Line addressing all of those issues, as both that document and as Mr. Looney alluded to himself. And so I'm just thinking that, and I know they're not going to certify that, the Gold Line is not going to certify that for another couple months, I think it is, and then we're going to have to deal with whatever that is. Chris, right? Is that the timeline?
I don't have the exact date, but they're required to respond to all the comments that have been provided by anybody who submitted them, including our letter.
By, like you said, end of May? Or June? Whatever.
I don't know, Henry.
There's no particular time limit. It's whenever they get
whenever they do
around
it.
to
Okay.
respond.
No, okay.
It could be that there's a tremendous amount of comments and analysis that has to be performed, so there's no date certain.
Yes, so they may be redoing the whole thing or whatever. It just makes me think about the two spots that we've identified as possible locations for Gold Line parking. And if for some reason, and I understand the Gold Line is basically going to say, when all is said and done, we want this one or we want this one, just based on what they think is the best idea. The city's going to give a lot of input, but the Gold Line's going to say, we want this one or we want that one. At this point, I don't know which one they're going to choose. Given the city's comments and other comments from the public, it seems that we should be thinking about, and I don't mean this is a public discussion on what we're going to do, but staff should be thinking, what happens if the Gold Line wants the parking lot to be where the city yard or most of the city yard is right now? And we should be thinking about, well, what are the alternatives? We had a study session guy a while back, and I was about a year ago or so, about some options or, moving the city yard. But we should take a long, deep look at what are the alternatives. Have we explored all the options? If we ourselves have to go out and condemn some property so that we can have a city yard someplace, what kind of property would that be? Whose property would that be? And I think that it would, and again, staff may be thinking about this internally, and if they're not, I'm just urging you to do it, because we don't want to get to the point where, you're going to be moving that city yard in a year, or whatever it might be, and then we have to hop around trying to figure out what to do. So that's just my comment. It's not necessarily direction, but it's a suggestion that we start thinking ahead about what that might entail. And that's all the comments I have.
Thank you, John. Eric. Well, the only thing that I'll mention is that I really appreciate the city's effort on putting on the Easter egg hunt. I know Councilmember Viena mentioned that he and I were running out in the middle of the desert like crazy people. But my kids were there, and I know they enjoyed it, and they had a good time. So I just want to thank city staff for putting that on. And I got pictures of it, and it definitely looked like it was a well-attended event. So thank you.
Well, I had the pleasure of attending the family festival, the Easter egg hunt last Saturday, and it was very popular. We had a special event there, and that was the Easter Bunny showed up, and that was fantastic, and the kids loved it. And there was a whole line almost around the block about people waiting to take pictures with their kids and the Easter Bunny. And so we should thank the Easter Bunny for showing up. I know he's very, very, very busy. And we also did an Easter egg hunt, and we had 3 different groups, one for age 2 to 3, one for age 4 to 6, and one for age 7 to 10. And there was over 5,000 eggs that we had out there. And as it was told before, that if you weren't there at 10 o'clock, at 1 minute after 10, everything was gone. The kids just had a fantastic time. And I want to thank staff, and they did an excellent job. The other thing is, as the city manager mentioned, I went to the Bonita Unified School District State of the District luncheon today, and we're very lucky. We have a fantastic school district, and it was very interesting that they not only are proud of their academics, but they're proud of their art program. And the San Dimas Jazz Band played, and they were just fantastic. And the Bonita High School Chorus also performed, and they were fantastic. And Supervisor or Superintendent Coles mentioned many of the facts about our our school district, and about how well we're performing, and it's just wonderful. As I always say, you can't have a fantastic city without having a fantastic school district, and we certainly have one. And I really enjoyed it. They did a good job.
Thank you. Ryan?
Thank you, Mayor. One is for Mr. Looney. Unfortunately, we had an opinion sought out from the state on this. I can't comment much on that issue because I'm conflicted with a financial conflict. But just as a Joe Blow citizen, what I'll say is that there are a lot of issues as it relates to the EIR, and perhaps some of my colleagues, for public interest's sake, might ask staff to give a high-level overview of that. But I'm not asking for that. I'm just throwing it out into space, and who knows? Because there's a lot of hiccups with what's going on there. And I think Councilman Ebner is also in the kind of same boat that I am. So maybe you can throw half of it out on one place of space, and I'll do the other half. I don't know. But anyways, Easter, I heard that event was really good, as Councilman Weber shared. He and I were out in the middle of the desert. For those that know or may not know, Baker to Vegas is a law enforcement event where law enforcement officers run 120 miles from Baker, California to Las Vegas. Our San Dimas Sheriff's Station also participated in that race. Unfortunately, neither Eric nor I nor San Dimas Sheriff Station mugged, as it's called, but we had a heck of a great time, and I assure you it was well worth it. I saw Deputy Gasparian, who's our traffic deputy, who you may see around here, checking into her leg, which was the same leg I was running, which was 6.1 miles, right around noon, and it was 94 degrees when I finished my race. So it was a long, hot day. So anyways, congratulations to everybody that participated. Thank you to all the volunteers, too. There are people I know that volunteer with that event that may not necessarily be Sheriff's Department employees or law enforcement, but they go out to support our station here, and your volunteerism is what also makes that possible. The support teams are huge. I mean, there's ham radio operators, and people to patrol courses and catch people that come in. So if you ever want to get involved with it, hit up the sheriff's station and figure out how to get you a spot. The wind events, there was wind events this week. Just a reminder, as some of you know, the last wind event looked like a disaster zone in some cities. Thankfully for us, it wasn't too bad, but we did have a couple trees fall, unfortunately. So be mindful, do your tree maintenance, and take care of any umbrellas and things like that so you're not littering all over the place. I do appreciate the proclamation regarding Autism Awareness Month. There are a lot of people in the community. I'm surprised, actually. I knew a couple families, and then shortly after I had shared my hopes of getting that proclamation through, other families reached out on social media, and a lot of people excited to see the city, potentially see training to be able to make our programs more accessible to people and have staff be more aware of what to look for young people with autism and others in the community who they may interact with here, even at City Hall. A couple last things. Small businesses. I appreciate Miss Cynthia Williams coming and talking about the garden event. My wife and I did have the opportunity to attend on Saturday after the Crime Survivors 5K run that was in Benelli Park. And I know the mayor and Councilmember Weber were there. He and I ran that one too. Well, he ran. I think I jogged. But our times show that. But bottom line is, it was a great event. Afterwards, stop by downtown. Appreciate the small businesses getting out there. Everything that they do, they really are inspirational. And if you get to know some of the small business owners that we have even in our downtown, their stories are phenomenal. So I highly encourage people to patronize our small businesses. And lastly, it is National Telecommunications Dispatcher Month. So our sheriff station, for those that don't know, and I talked a little bit about this, when you call 911 in San Dimas, your call actually goes to our sheriff station here in San Dimas, and you're actually talking to one of the dispatchers that's there. If you're on the freeway, the odds are it's going to go to the CHP. And if you need fire or rescue, it's transferred to LA County Fire Department, which is a centralized dispatch center. But most people don't know that when you actually call 911 from the city, it's actually going literally to our sheriff station. So if you've never had the opportunity to check that out, if you go to the San Dimas Sheriff Station, the folks that are in the blue shirts, they are our law enforcement technicians or dispatchers, and they're actually the ones that when you're there and you hear these calls, I understand there are some people that have not had pleasant experiences when they call the sheriff station desk, and I'm not acknowledging, understanding the business line concerns. But when you call 911 and your loved one's having a heart attack and they have to walk you through CPR, these people do incredible work. And so I highly encourage anyone that ever wants to check it out. I'm sure Captain Ashrafny would be happy to hook you up with a tour or the station, and thank these people. They do really good work every day and often are overlooked. So please acknowledge them this week, show your appreciation, and hope everybody has a blessed and happy Easter. The Easter Bunny, I know, is going to be busy in the week ahead. So thank you, Dennis, too, for bringing that up. Have a good week.
Okay, thank you. I, too, attended the 5K run. The one thing I didn't do is I didn't run. I didn't walk. I was just there, and it it was interesting to see the sheriff was there and many law enforcement type people for a good cause. After that, I attended a Benelli Bluffs sponsored car show and vintage trailer show with the funding going to McKinley's Boys Home. The money they raised for that, they supported it. It was an all-day event, and it was quite interesting to see how nice these cars were that people put together. But then that's something that I never really thought about is vintage trailers. Trailers from all kinds of trailers from whatever, but they had a great event and very well attended. In fact, both of these events were extremely well attended here in San Dimas. Okay. Today, I had the opportunity, just like Dennis and John and Chris, to attend the State of the District address that it was out at Sheridan. It was not only a good dinner, or a good lunch rather, but it was extremely gratifying to hear from everyone there, from Carl Coles to his staff, to the people who attended, of just how our district weathered the last 2 years with the COVID and everything. Our kids, I got to tell you truly, we all should rest assured that our kids are in good shape, and they're very well being taken care of by the staff, the teachers. The students themselves take care of themselves too. They know where they're going, and they have all ambitions. One of the things I thought was pretty neat, that I kind of had thought things like homemaking classes and auto classes and things like that had kind of really been gone by the wayside. But today, at the luncheon, I found out that a lot of those things are back and moving forward. In fact, they served hors d'oeuvres before lunch, and they were prepared by the students at San Dimas High School in their I don't know the exact name of it, but cooking class, and I'd hire any of them to come and cater a dinner for anybody I know. They were very, very good, and I wanted to commend the school district for bringing those type of programs back. It's really pretty neat. One thing I wanted to say about the Easter egg hunt is that somebody just made a comment that said the Easter Bunny is going to be pretty busy and stuff. Well, here in San Dimas, they have twins, because at the same time in Community Park and at Villa Verde, the same Easter Bunny, and then by 10:01 they were done, and the Easter Bunny was gone. So yeah, it really works out well. Both Easter bunnies actually looked like each other. They had the ears and things like that. So it was fun. You should see the kids, and they really had a great time. And probably one of the things that is coming up is it's just a reminder that tomorrow the Chamber of Commerce is going to, as well as the Assemblyman Holden, is going to recognize Marilyn Sparks, who was here this evening at the Walker House at 5:15. She's going to receive the commendation from the Assemblyman himself. Everybody is welcome. I believe there's going to be some food. Let's show Marilyn of how much we appreciate all the work she does here in San Dimas. And by doing that, you're also going to recognize the chamber. The chamber, the things that they do for us is phenomenal. So with that, if unless somebody else has something they want to say, we'll close the meeting. Jeff, do we have a closed session?
Yes, we have closed session after the meeting tonight.
Okay.
I believe that's another one that I have to recuse myself.
No wonder you brought it up.
It's another one I can leave and go home early from.
John has to, because he has financial interest in a property near the site that we're going to be discussing. All right. So everyone have a good night. We'll see you in 2 weeks, and we'll move forward.
you.